afternoon, everybody. I am coming to you live from my kitchen for a one-of-a-kind live here today. You are here in the Libby Kitchen in Auburn with Representative Josh Morris, who has graciously agreed to join me today to talk about a bill that he submitted last week. Why are we in my kitchen? Because my kids are counting on completed sugar cookies when they get home from school today, and there are only so many hours in the day. So Representative Morris is here to join me as I do what I need to do, and we have a conversation about paid family leave. That's what we're here to talk about. So Representative Morris, can you tell us about your legislation? What did you submit last week?
Yes, I submitted a bill, an act to stop government overreach and repeal the payroll taxes. That would repeal the Paid Family Medical Leave Act that was passed last year. Specifically, I did it to repeal the new tax that is going to hit Maine businesses and Maine workers beginning January 1st with another 1% tax. This is when we're already the fourth highest tax state in the nation, and this would bump us up to number 2, which is not a direction we want to go.
Absolutely. And I've certainly heard from viewers, from constituents, and folks around the state, they're not in favor of this 1% tax. And I think maybe some folks, in hearing about this legislation, heard about paid family leave, sounds like a great idea, until you start talking about this 1% tax.
Yeah.
And so let's go back in time. Maybe some folks aren't aware of what we're talking about. Let's go back in time and talk a little bit about the legislation, the process that happened, and where we are now because of it.
Yes, so last session there was a bill introduced into the Labor Committee by now Senate President Maddie Daughtry to enact a new paid family medical leave law. What the law included is a provision that to pay for it, there's another 1% payroll tax, one half paid by the employer, one half paid by the employee, unless you get down to under 15 employees, and then only the employee has to pay their contribution.
You know what I'm super curious about? We're gonna go with Josh and Laurel here. Representative Morris is getting a little cumbersome. What I am really curious about, part of that legislative process was that there was a citizens initiative to pass paid family leave, and I honestly I don't remember the details, but I wonder how many people signed something thinking that they were signing for paid family leave, and how many people signed something thinking that they were signing for a new tax increase,
Right.
The biggest tax increase that we have seen in decades. And so the argument was made, well, Maine people support paid family leave. Do Maine people support this 1% tax? Well, that is really hitting home with people now, and I don't think it did when the legislation was coming through the legislature.
No, I don't think that, again, the devil's in the details, and I don't think people realized that this was going to be paid for with a new paid tax
Yeah.
on every worker in Maine will have to contribute every week to their paycheck. And, as I said earlier, as I've said in other interviews today, that means that is less money they have for groceries, that's less money they have to pay for their heating bills, that's less money they have to pay for all the other important bills that they have to pay every week now, because that money's going to a new tax for a program that the earliest they'll be able to access it is May of next year.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, this is all Maine workers. So we're talking about over 685,000 Maine workers that are going to be taxed. And what percentage of those Maine workers are actually going to utilize when it does kick in 2026? What percentage of Maine workers are actually going to use this program? So everyone is going to be taxed for the small percentage, total that end up using this. So tell me a little bit, let's talk about the nuts and bolts, because I think Maine people are reeling a little bit, employers and employees, because this is just going into effect now when it's legislation that was passed, a year and a half ago now.
A year and a half ago, last July. At the end of last July, it was passed.
And so now we've got implementation coming January 1st, when this tax is going to be taken out of paychecks for the first time. and it's a bit of a mess. I
It's
mean,
a terrible mess.
the portal's not ready.
Nope.
The state of Maine's just saying, just deduct it and we'll tell you what to do when we figure it out. And so there's not even good guidance from the state on how this is going to work practically.
Right.
And yet Maine employers are supposed to just, figure it out at this point and start deducting that new tax.
Well, I mean, look, this shouldn't be surprising. Laura Fortman is the same commissioner of labor that was in charge during the COVID pandemic with all the problems that the Maine Department of Labor had with the unemployment system. So with people not getting their benefits, having to call repeatedly, and still not getting through to anybody. So this is the same department that's going to be trying to run this with the same people that couldn't figure out the unemployment system. And I think if we go back and we talk a little about the utilization piece, the problem is we don't know what the utilization is going to be because they didn't do any actuarial analysis to get an understanding of that.
So we don't know how many people are going to actually utilize this system.
Exactly. And with the way that the law so broadly defines family, there's actually a term, anybody with whom you consider to have a familial relationship.
So that doesn't necessarily mean blood or in-laws or...
Right. It could be your next door neighbor is like a sibling to you, or the person who walks your dog is like a relative.
So this could be used very, very, very broadly.
It can be interpreted very broadly. So you take time off to care for them and you get paid out of this program. And again, very broad, which it's going to be open to abuse. And I think it creates a situation, of what they call a moral hazard, where you're going to have people taking it because they paid into it and they feel like they're entitled to it.
Well, I mean, I can't argue with that, right? If I pay in a tax for a benefit, I better be able to use it. And that's the thing, this is a mandatory tax for every worker, for every employer with 15 or more employees. And so the title of that term, moral hazard, is really interesting because is it a moral hazard even to want to use a program that you've paid into?
Right.
And
well, remember, a traditional insurance program works in such a way that they need more people to be paying in than are taking the benefit.
Right.
And this creates the problem. Everybody is being forced to pay in. And generally it works okay when if you and I work together, we're in the same, we're working for the same employer. There's an understanding that I don't want to take that benefit's there in case I need it.
Right.
But I don't want to take it because unless I absolutely do need it. Because by doing that, I'm also putting you in a position where not only do my wages go down, but your wages can go down and be affected.
Of course, we're not in that situation, though. We're here where the state of Maine has taken upon themselves, right, to be in that position, and so is mandating that you and I, right, all employees in the state of Maine have to pay this tax. So, so there's a little bit of the history. This was passed a year and almost a half ago in July. It was passed within the budget.
Right.
So it was perhaps easy to overlook. I think a lot of people didn't know that it got passed because it was part of a budget rather than just as a standalone bill. So I think that has confused some folks who go, when was this even passed? And when we point to this legislation, then you have to comb through an entire budget to find the various pieces.
To find the various different pieces that were in that budget, correct.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the, kind of egregious pieces of this. One is, of course, that this is taxing the entire workforce, while only some are going to get the benefit. It's mandatory. It's mandatory for businesses. It's mandatory for employees. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other kind of egregious pieces to it, but I just want to remind folks, go ahead and put your questions in the comments because we will work to get to those once we finish our chat portion of this. And also, I would love to know, if you're an employer or an employee, what are the pieces that you find most egregious as we look at this paid family leave? And again, of course, throw your questions in the comments. So, Josh, of course, for me, increasing bureaucracy and the fact that I don't know about you, I'm hearing from a lot of businesses that this is kind of the final straw.
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen businesses start to close, and some that have said that they're closing at the end of December, and it is in part because of this
Mm-hmm.
that they are going to have to deal with another bureaucracy,
Mm-hmm.
as well as having to pay an additional tax. And they're worried that people are not going to be frequenting their business because they're going to have to raise their prices
Mm-hmm.
to be able to pay for this. And that is not something, for many of them, it's, there's the famous saying, who is John Gull? And that is, for those who don't know, that's from the book Atlas Shrugged. I would encourage you to read it if you haven't. But it is effectively that when businesses are put into this situation, when productive people are put into a position of where it makes it harder for them to be productive, they just decide to scrap what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them will probably, if they're closing their business, they may leave the state of Maine, which is not something that we would want because we're going to lose some of our best job creators.
Yeah. So, so that's, I think, a very important point is that we have these businesses, that are kind of deciding, do I even continue? Do I downsize?
Right.
We have businesses that are saying, I'm just over the 15 employee margin. I'm going to have to just downsize my business and get rid of some of my employees. Other businesses are saying they're going to have to close altogether in order to pay for this tax. That's what I'm hearing. And so, on the one hand, you've got this benefit that's supposedly so wonderful for employees that they'll be able to take leave, when what we're hearing is that actually, and this makes sense, right? The cost of doing business is that some employees will potentially lose their jobs over this.
Mm-hmm.
It's that final straw for businesses. And so, talk about that a little bit. That's kind of one of the downsides that we don't hear about with the folks that are proponents of this legislation.
Yeah, if there's no jobs available for somebody to be able to get this paid leave from, then they're not going to be able to take the paid leave. And by the way, they're not going to have wages to be able to feed their family, or they're not going to be able to have health care and health insurance, and they're not going to be able to pay any of their bills if there are no jobs because the job creators decided to leave because they don't want to have to deal with another bureaucracy, don't want to have to pay another tax, don't want to have to collect more money from their employees. And that is what will happen. That is one of the things that we are beginning to see happen because we've already seen in just the last few months in Portland a number of businesses close, and we've heard more announced in the last few weeks. And I believe you will hear even more announced that over the next few weeks as this program begins to take shape and people start to have to pay into it.
Yeah, and first batch in the oven. One thing we've talked about, unintended consequences, right? The unintended consequences of legislation. What I think folks also don't think about when we're talking about taxing employees and businesses more, that cost has to go somewhere. So this cost is going to get passed along. It's going to get passed along to consumers, the customers. It could get passed along to the employees. I heard of one business that is going to be paying the entire 1% of the tax. They're theoretically not going to put that on their employee. But what happens next year when those employees don't get a raise because their employer is busy paying this increased tax rather than giving their employees a well-deserved raise? I mean, these are these unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That is what happens. I mean, one of the things that is already happening is, because I know this having served on the health insurance committee, is people not getting as much of a raise now because they have to pay, their business is paying an additional amount for health insurance, as well as seeing their deductibles increase, seeing copays increase. And you will see the same thing with this, is that if the business has to now pay an additional 0.5% on every single employee that they have on their wages, that means that that's less money they're going to have for raises for their employees. It's less money that they're going to have for health insurance benefits. It's less money they're going to be able to have to offer paid time off, because the money has to go to this new program because this is the law, and whereas those other things are voluntary. And effectively what you have is this sort of race to the bottom, where these businesses are just trying to offer what they have to by a mandate from the government, as opposed to actually trying to compete with each other to offer the best package for what employees actually want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one consequence, or one piece of this legislation that I think we as legislators really maybe didn't even know about, is the piece around taxation in 2028. And you included this in your press release, talking about how in 2028, if this program is not adequately funded, that the third-party agency that's managing it will be able to raise taxes.
Correct.
And this is unprecedented and probably unconstitutional. So can you talk a little bit, Josh, about that piece, and what is our legislative responsibility? And I know you have that piece of the Constitution queued right up, so feel free to read that so that our viewers can know what Maine Constitution says about it.
Yeah, the Maine Constitution says that the legislature shall never surrender its taxing authority.
So not even if we pass paid family leave and want a third-party agency to increase funding if we fall short. So not even then.
Exactly, not even then. Constitution is very clear. The legislature shall have sole authority over taxation, and it shall not surrender that authority. And this law does just that. Beginning in 2028, a third-party entity will be able to assess the tax based upon what the utilization is through 2026 and 2027.
So let's think about this for a minute here. We have unelected bureaucrats who work for a third-party agency who will be able to determine if Maine people are paying enough tax into this program or not, and then determine if those taxes should be increased in order to more adequately fund the program. And yet our Constitution says that shall never be surrendered, I believe is the language, right? The authority of taxation shall never be surrendered from the legislature. And of course, that makes sense because the legislature is elected by the people, right? And so we have the people electing the legislature, and being able to be the ultimate hire and fire authority, right? So then you've got unelected bureaucrats off in an agency somewhere raising taxes. How does a Maine person have any recourse with that scenario? They don't. And so that is a huge problem with this bill that you brought up today.
I would say it's even worse than an agency. It's a third party. The third party administrator is going to be a corporation that may not have any connection to Maine or Maine citizens or Maine people, that will be the ones that will get to determine the assessment of any future raises in this tax. And you think about it, we're surrendering our taxation authority to a corporation that's goal is to make money.
Right, they're not administering this for free or for fun.
They are doing this because they want money for, and again,
it's a business.
We're pro business. Right, we're pro business. I'm very pro business, and I'm usually in favor of
just not business on the backs of Maine people in an unconstitutional way.
Exactly. I don't think we need to be asking Maine people to pay a higher tax so that we can fund another business's ability. Right. To be able to, especially since what we're doing to Maine small businesses, and we're doing it on the backs of Maine small businesses and job creators and Maine workers, who are all going to be negatively impacted by this in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's one piece that we've heard a fair amount about. This is going to be affecting people so broadly, and in fact, one of the pieces, back to the most egregious pieces on this legislation, one of those is the fact that there are already many companies in Maine that are already providing a great paid family leave benefit, right?
Exactly.
They want to draw employees to their business. It's a benefit that they've offered for a while, and so their employees are maybe perfectly happy with their paid leave that they have available. And yet this law mandates that those businesses have to pay in, that those employees have to pay in, even after the 4 months when they can apply to be allowed to maintain their own program. They still have to pay. The employee still has to pay that 0.5%. It just goes to their own paid leave program.
Right.
So there's no relief in sight for anyone, and it's mandatory for even folks who have a great program right now. That's, to me, pretty egregious.
Well, exactly. The idea of it is that if you had a comparable program, you did not have to pay into this. But January 1st, everybody's going to be paying in because they're not granting any exceptions until April at the earliest. And so you're going to have those months where people are paying in that may ultimately be granted an exception. And there is nothing in this that I have heard that they are going to be eligible to get that money back.
No, I mean, those funds are basically being used to kickstart, right?
Exactly.
They have to pay in because otherwise this fund wouldn't be solvent.
Right.
And so they are being required to pay in to fund a system that they are never going to use.
Right.
And so, I mean, talk about taxation without representation, right? I mean, these people are going to be paying into a system that they legitimately will never qualify to use. And they're going to be, those funds are then going to be used to allow others to take leave while they will literally never qualify to use it.
Exactly. They will never be able to get access to this money because this is going to be, they're going to have their own personal program.
Which is great.
Which is great.
It's a nice draw for those businesses. But right now, I bet, those businesses are kind of kicking themselves because they're not kicking themselves, but certainly kicking the Maine legislature.
Yes, they're not happy. I mean, there is a lot of frustration among those businesses, particularly those that thought they were going to get an exemption, that were going to have an exception granted to them because this law allowed for it, and they'd be able to offer something for their employees. And the other problem with it is you're going to have the state government that gets to decide if the program is adequate for the employee.
Right.
Not as opposed to the traditional way, which is the employee and the employer decide through a free market what is adequate for them. I mean, I personally think, if you're working at a business and they say they can only offer you 6 weeks of paid leave for something like this, but they're offering you more in vacation time, most employers will some employees will take that trade-off. Others may prefer to have more paid time off in these situations, but that's the beauty of the free market, is the people get to decide through where they choose to go to work, and the businesses get to find the employees based on what the employee wants. And what we have with this system is a situation where the government's going to decide whether the program is good enough, not the employee and not the employer. And I think that is not the way to do this.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry, folks. We're talking about significant growth of government in multiple ways with this legislation. I want to jump over to folks' questions here for a few minutes. Do you have any other thoughts, Josh, on the kind of egregious components of it before we jump into questions here?
I think, again, just the most egregious thing to me is that we have surrendered our taxation authority to a third-party entity rather than having it, because there are politicians that simply don't want to be on the hook every year for having to raise taxes. I'm perfectly happy to see taxes go up, but they don't want to be seen voting for a tax increase.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? So by giving the authority of taxation to this third party administrator, now the legislature gets to be off the hook and doesn't have to be responsible for raising your taxes.
Right. The seats are very comfortable. They won't need a spine.
Yeah. Yeah. So Donna points out that their town is going to pay the entire tax. Mm-hmm. And yes, Donna, you're absolutely right. That will increase property taxes again for you guys. That is likely to be coming.
Well, that's another important point that local and municipal governments, including your school systems, are going to be on the hook to have to pay this some way, and that means your property taxes will go up because of how many. My small town of Turner doesn't have a lot of people working for the town office, but our school system has a significant number of employees, and I think they already offer some sort of a program, but this is going to require them to contribute taxes into the main state government.
Yeah. So Matthew points out, he says, this is a boondoggle for Maine taxpayers and raise expenses not just on the businesses, but also government operations. Yeah, absolutely. This is another way that government is going to be growing here in the state of Maine, unacceptable way that government will be growing here in the state of Maine. And we have a comment then from a gal who lives in rural Maine, Aristic. She says, do they even think about us up here in rural Maine? I love Maine, born and raised here, but I'm disgusted with the politicians we have here. Can't get a straight answer as to why our property taxes went up, and now they're just adding taxes left and right. We talked about earlier how we are already the 4th highest taxed state in the nation. This is going to increase that designation. Maybe we'll be first, second, third. I'm not sure.
We used to be number 1.
We're shooting for first, I guess.
It seems like under Troy Jackson, Matty Daughtry, you can just change the players and the names, but the ideas don't change.
Yeah, absolutely. So Danielle Cummings asks, if you know it's unconstitutional, why can't it be stopped? That's a great question, Danielle. And I know that the idea of a court challenge has been batted around. It's certainly also, I don't know if there is one in the works. I'm not involved with one. But I would love to see one. Yeah. Of course, the wheels turn slowly there. And so Representative Morris has submitted his bill for repeal, which I will remind folks, with the current Democrat majority, is a long shot. But it is, we have to try.
I think you absolutely have to put on the record that Republicans are fighting, and Republicans need to fight like we've never fought before against a unconstitutional tax increase, which is what this is. And to stop it before Maine people see their taxes increased, which is what this bill does, but also to return those taxes that get collected before this bill can pass, so that those taxes can be returned as soon as possible. And I think, it's really going to take Maine people showing up at the public hearing, calling their legislator and making them aware that we don't want to pay this tax. We're not opposed. And I'm not opposed to having some sort of a study about how we can do some sort of paid family medical leave, or giving businesses a road, if they want it, to be able to offer this.
Well, and that's what we've talked about here is that this is mandatory. This is a new tax that is mandatory on Maine ratepayers. Listen, if Maine people want a paid family leave program, there are other options that exist within the free market. But this was not Maine people in the free market trying to, form a paid family leave. This was shoved through the legislature in a budget by the Democrat majority. I've heard from plenty of business owners and employees that also are Democrats. So let me be very clear. This was Augusta Democrats, not Democrats by and large. And it's going to harm Maine people of every party.
Absolutely. No, this will make your taxes go up, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent.
And your costs as you look to pay for the goods and services that you use here in the state of Maine.
Exactly. And I was in the legislature in the 129th when Sarah Gideon brought forward a similar bill that was a piece of campaign propaganda for her at the time. And this bill was no more ready for prime time, no better. it suffered from the exact same problems. They're not sure how much it's going to cost. And now we're in a position where we're starting to see people are worried about this tax that is upcoming. And again, we're going to see in 2028 the potential for the tax to be increased without any legislative oversight.
So, as we wrap things up here, what you've got your legislation moving forward in January. This is not a quick fix. The legislative process is slow. Your bill, it is emergency legislation. That means, as currently constituted, it would need 2/3 of the legislature to pass. What do you think? Do you think there are any chances that we'll get some gubernatorial push behind this effort as Governor Mills sees the disaster that this implementation has become and how shocked Maine people are at this new tax and the leave program?
I would be surprised if Governor Mills wanted to do anything around repealing it. One, she came out very publicly in support of signing the legislation last year. She said she would in the middle of 2 years ago. So I highly doubt that she's going to change her mind. The second piece of that is she is the one that appointed Laura Fortman, and she saw the disaster of the COVID response from the Department of Labor, and there was zero accountability for it from Governor Mills to her labor secretary, to her labor commissioner. I don't suspect that this will be any different with the disastrous rollout that this has been, and with the disaster that the program is likely to have. Because remember, in 2028, when the tax is going to be raised, Janet Mills is going to be long gone.
Right.
And in 2026, we'll be in the middle of the campaign season, and she won't be running for election. So I would be surprised.
Well, who knows? I hear interesting rumors about Janet Mills maybe running against Susan Collins. So who knows who that Democrat challenger will be, but it certainly would be interesting to see Governor Mills running against Susan Collins with this boondoggle of a paid family leave implementation, this new tax on Mainers, and then trying to run a statewide race. Guys, please feel free to continue to throw your questions in the comments. We would love to keep up with them and answer your questions. Any last words, Representative Morris? Any advice? What should Maine people do? And I'm looking for a certain answer from you. What should Maine people do as this legislation moves forward?
They should call their representative, call their senator, encourage them to support my bill to repeal this horrible tax. But more importantly, pay attention to when the public hearing is.
Absolutely.
And let's show up in big numbers and make our voices heard to the Democrats on the Labor Committee and to the Democrats in the Maine legislature, so that they know that there is an appetite from Maine people to let the free market dictate this and repeal this tax that is going to stifle business, already stifling business, is going to make it harder for people to have a business in the state of Maine and cause costs to go up even further.
Absolutely. I mean, after all, at the end of the day, we're serving in the minority, and this legislation is a good piece of legislation to repeal this new tax that is a burden on Maine people. But the only people who have the power to really make any change here are Maine people. And of course, a couple of ways that you can do that. Yes, by calling your representatives and senators and letting them know your thoughts on this current law that will be being implemented January 1st. But then, yes, staying in touch and showing up in person to this public hearing. I was talking to, we were actually at the same event last Thursday, and I was talking to a business owner who, belongs to a coalition of business owners, and their lobbyist does a great job of coming to the State House and testifying on bills. And I think that's a benefit, but it's a very limited benefit. And what's really incredible is to see actual Maine people, Maine business owners, Maine employees show up to testify on a piece of legislation. Because when you see the numbers of people, one lobbyist might represent hundreds or even thousands of people. But when you see the actual people then coming through the door and speaking up for your rights, that is a different thing altogether. And so stay tuned. I will be sending out email information on when this bill is coming up for public hearing. It will be coming to my committee, the Labor Committee, that I am newly on this year, and I'm looking forward to advocating for this bill and other bills to help grow our economy, to benefit workers, to not impede on businesses. And so thank you very much for submitting this bill, Representative Morris, and for advocating for Maine workers, and for coming on today to explain your legislation and advocate for folks to get involved.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for helping to get the word out. This is important too, and I hope to see you all at the State House in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.